All right. Welcome to another open source office hours coming to you live from the Lever HQ. So yeah, let's start off with some announcements, and then we'll go over some questions from anyone here as well. I think I saw a couple in the chat room that I wanted to address, and then we will finish off, or I guess sometimes we have a section for bugs if any come up. So let's start with announcements. Nate, you did some work on Derby Standalone, right?
Yeah, I basically got it running again, and also made it so it builds each version so that you can actually kind of start using it. So it's hosted on GitHub, so you can just use it through like the GitHub static pages server. That's not super performant, but it's good for prototyping. At some point, it'd be good to move it to CDN. But the idea behind Derby Standalone is that we actually have support in Derby for doing stuff just as a client-side app, or doing it as a server-side app, or doing it as both and kind of having a real-time synced thing. So what's cool about that is you could write your app in the context of another thing that already you have going, and you don't need to have like a full stack Derby project per se. You can like just start using little parts of it, and then you can share the same components with other projects you have that use full stack Derby. So it's a pretty neat thing that it's pretty different than what's out there in other frameworks. Like in Meteor's a little more like all or nothing, and compared to something like Angular, Angular is really great if you want to use it on the client, but then it doesn't really have good ways to use it for server rendering or for it doesn't have built-in sort of real-time data syncing like Derby and Meteor do.
Yeah. Also, in the README of the standalone repo, I added a CodePen example, so you can play with Derby in a CodePen, which is it's kind of nice to kind of highlight that you can just use it anywhere. And then I also made a block of it, which is basically an example index.html where we're rendering Derby templates into a div of our choice, not like using it for the whole page.
Mm-hmm.
And so that allows you to kind of use templates or components standalone inside an existing project that might not, you don't want to rewrite the entire thing in Derby just yet, but you will eventually. All right. Any other announcements, Pavel or Joseph?
Yeah. So I met up with Jason, the author of Quill, last week, and he's been working on updating Quill to work with ShareJS. So proud to announce that now all of the randomizer tests are passing. So that found a bunch of bugs and and found some problems that weren't real problems, but were things that he wanted to fix up. Some just a lot of strange edge cases. So that's all like passing now, which means that the rich text type that Quill uses is like fully will work consistently with ShareJS. So yeah, which is really exciting. We don't have any examples or anything else up yet, but yeah, but it should all work already.
Is it ready to go in the currently published version of Share, or is it still in like another branch?
It's in the currently published version of Share. So it's not actually like bundled. I'll post a link in the chat. OT types text, I think it is. No, I'll post a link in the chat. But yeah, it's if you use Quill, the rich text type that he has works with yeah, it'll just work with ShareJS. You have to register it on both the server and client at the moment. So yeah.
Got it. But it doesn't require any changes to Share.
No.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. We actually have been waiting for a while to start using rich text in our app. So
yeah, a lot of people have been in that mode. We need to put out a big announcement email to the mailing list and stuff with some demos. But yeah.
Cool. Sweet. I'm excited to use that.
Cool.
Awesome. Any other announcements?
Not from my end. I've still mostly been on holidays. I've working on Boilerplate, and I've done a bunch of changes there. But yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to spend my time doing next year, and I've been sort of flitting between a lot of different projects to try and figure that out. So Yeah.
Cool.
Nothing yet.
What about you, Pavel? Anything new?
No, actually, we was working on our stuff a lot this week. Lots of stuff related to the clusters and like our whole production setup. So
Cool.
nothing actually developed.
That's cool. Yeah, so we're also here at Lever just doing quarterly planning. So we kind of have some idea of what we're going to be doing. We're also been doing a lot of hiring recently. So just so people know, I've actually scheduled in some time this quarter to myself work on improving Derby and Derby documentation soon, in like the next couple weeks. And then also later in the quarter, we have somebody joining who's going to be helping to make the PubSub layer more scalable, because it works really great, but we run into issues when you're using like many thousands of documents, because you have queries that return a lot of results, and that can be made a lot more efficient. So we're working on making LiveDB a lot more scalable this quarter.
What changes are you planning on making to LiveDB?
Well, it'll be good to discuss with you, but I think so one thing I found out is that the Redis driver, like the Node Redis driver, does not support the multiple subscribes at once or unsubscribes at once. But there's some other Redis implementations now for Node. So we could try one of those just for PubSub.
Yeah.
Is one thing. And that would just be a quick win. And then another thing that we could do, which would be, I think, really a relatively small amount of change that would be really helpful for a couple of reasons, is we could basically create a channel per query. And there's like two reasons why that could be helpful. One, just we have fewer channels being registered, and it ultimately makes more sense to just like, for the clients that are connecting and disconnecting frequently, just have them like subscribe or unsubscribe to one channel instead of like thousands.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's good about that is, especially if you have a lot of queries that are the same for multiple clients, if they're on different servers, they don't actually get to share the subscriptions as well as if they hit one server right now, the way LiveDB is currently written, because it like uses an event emitter if it's on the same instance, but if it's in a different process, it doesn't get to reuse that work. So if we moved all of that into a layer like Redis or whatever PubSub layer, so they actually could like share the subscription effectively, it would probably end up being better in like a scaled environment.
So you're imagining sharing the subscription somehow between different processes? Like, I'm not entirely clear how that would.
I haven't really figured it out yet. Like, honestly, I was going to find it out with Martin, who's the new guy joining us. But the basic idea is that if you have a subscription and we're keeping it up to date, then if we stored the results in Redis, we don't need to rerun the whole thing because we're keeping it up to date, so we can just grab it out of Redis, right? Like what results. And then in terms of like figuring out, right now what we do is we get all the results, then we send off a bunch of subscribes to a bunch of documents. We can just have that running already, like we know what those things are, and we just like translate that into a publish on a channel that's for that query. So that was like two quick wins I saw.
That second one, that's something that I've been thinking about, not exactly in those terms. I mean, I guess if you wanted, you could just have it so that basically one server was responsible for maintaining the shared set of like the actual results for a particular query, and then everybody just subscribes to that one server's, like live query. So only one server then is polling longer. But yeah, I mean, like that's making a like a query engine that can that doesn't have to poll longer and just watches the changes themselves and decides what should or shouldn't be in a query result set, and then publishes an index is something that I've been something I've talked about doing for a long time. So yeah. Yeah,
and it actually should make the initial query fetch faster too, right? Because if you know that it's being live kept up to date, you can just grab it from Redis. There's no need to go to Mongo.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
It should be a lot faster under like these common use cases where the same query is used a lot, which at least for Lever we do a lot, and I have a feeling that lots of applications would have that need.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's system engineering.
Yeah, so I'll talk with you more about it before we actually work on it. Martin's not joining for a couple weeks, but sure. That was my rough plan that I like scoped out for this quarter.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, definitely we should chat about it at some point.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. So you're. I mean, maybe we can talk about this later. But you're bringing someone in to work on a lot of this stuff. You're hiring somebody to do that?
Trying to bring in 2 people to work on this stuff. Yes.
Oh, great. Well, maybe either before or after then, I should come into the office and just sit down and chat with them about it all.
No, that'd be super awesome, actually. Yeah. I'll let you know when he starts. I think it's November 5th, if I recall.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good.
And you're going to Australia at the end of November, you said?
November 30, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, just in time.
Sweet.
All right, so maybe we should move on to any questions people have.
Okay, so one question from me about the components. So Nate, what do you think about the way to have some kind of dependencies for the components itself? So for example, in our application, we have lots of Derby application in one project, and some of them, and they share the same like components space. Yeah, where they use some of them use some specific components, others use another components, and those components depend on other components. Sure. And it would be good to just like don't specify in your main file of your like Derby application, don't specify all of those dependent components, but just plug in the main component which is being used. For example, like the form builder component, and this component itself is going to plug in all of those dependent components, small ones.
Yeah, the reason why I basically didn't put that in the templates themselves is that typically, I mean, there's basically a trade-off. So Node.js says, well, we'll build this whole thing where if stuff is in the local node modules directory, we just use it from there. But if it's not in there, we look up a directory and kind of does this whole thing. And it has a whole like versioning system with semantic versions, and it's actually a very, very good system. I didn't really feel like building that all over again for Derby components. It seemed like a little overkill, especially when Node already has something. So I just sort of said, not going to think about it for now, and basically it's effectively a global namespace, which is what most package managers start as, even though that they all have this problem eventually. So this is just a classic package manager problem. And I'd rather not reinvent the wheel. I'd rather just use NPM. It's always been what we've tried to do. So I think the main thing that is going to be tricky is figuring out how to like have components with versions if you want to use the same component in multiple versions in the same project. And anyway, I just kind of punted on it because it just didn't seem that important. But what we could do to just not worry about that too much is in the package JSON of the component, it could specify other components in just like another field, like component dependencies. And then Derby could eventually get smart about looking at package JSON files. But it's more work, and frankly, right now, it is, I don't think it's that much extra time, because it's kind of like the thing you do once, and then it's like, oh shit, my thing didn't build because I forgot to require something. Okay, I required it. It's like 2 minutes of your time. So in terms of trade-offs of complexity of implementation versus like benefit to the developer, I, for now, decided not to do it. But it's a good idea. It just doesn't seem as important as other problems at the moment, like scaling and documentation. So.
Yep. Okay, so I guess the best way is to just plug those components with something like app-use, and in their code, they're going to plug other components themselves. I guess that's the best choice for now.
I mean, I think the right thing to do is to use the package JSON file, because it basically allows you to use the full expressivity of Node's semantic versions. But obviously, Derby has to then like do some work to support that.
Yeah.
So the nice thing about doing that, though, is that if you do it right, Node will just take care of installing all the right things at the right levels. And then if Derby just uses what's installed where in the Node modules folders correctly, it could even deal with the case of having two different components that are the same thing but at different versions, and like doesn't have to worry about all the difficulty of figuring out where to get those things installed.
Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And
So,
by the way, when you develop a component for your application that you move out into a separate project, how do you usually organize this? How do you usually test this component?
we do two things. One, we have like this component examples thing that Ian also kind of made an open source version of. It's pretty basic. It's literally just like a list, and then you click on it, and it loads a page with the component on it and nothing else. It's really all it is. And then you can have an example that lets you test it. And then that also serves as documentation for other people about like how to use it, because you can use it multiple times in your example. And then in our app, we just use it. That's it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, nothing fancy. I mean, yes, we could definitely build a better system here, and I think using the package based on with a thing like component dependencies or something like that, or something to that effect would be great. But it's definitely work, and I don't feel like it's the most important problem right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Thanks.
But it is a good idea. I agree.
Okay.
If I had 12 people that were idle waiting to do work, I would put one of them on it.
Yeah.
So there's a question that this kind of came up last week with the standalone stuff. Someone asked this in the chat room. So they wanted to use Derby. They want to get server-side rendering and client-side data binding, but they don't want routing, database bindings, or any of like the racer stuff. So is there some combination of things they can do, or are they like barking up the wrong tree, or what's?
They can. So this is something I haven't really totally figured out how to like do elegantly, but things in Derby are sort of modular, but sort of like not broken out in the best way yet still. Some work to figure out how to refactor everything to make all of these use cases ideal. Basically, like, we have server rendering, we have real-time data syncing, we have just the data layer without Derby, we have like just the data layer on just the server without Derby, we have just Derby on the client, and then you could have just Derby on the client that's real-time connected to a backend, but you're not using server rendering. So all of these things are great ideas, and like actually that's one of Derby's strengths, is it could support all of these things really well. And as far as I'm aware, nothing else is really fully integrated that does all these things. So that's actually really, really awesome. And I think as I've been talking more about Derby to people who've been trying to like hire, this is the thing that keeps coming up as particularly innovative about it, is sort of its modularity, but also integration. And I think that, to make a long story short, all of these things are possible, but I don't have like a ready-made solution where it's like really easy to do that. Just doing server rendering is very easy. And now that we have Derby Standalone, you can just do that. You can just use it in the client. The routing stuff is currently included, but I'm going to break it out so it's not included by default. But you can just require tracks separately. That's going to be a breaking change because we're going to have to remove the router by default. And then, yeah, the rest, like how do you connect your server to your client model without using Racer is a question. So it'd be nice to have like an example of how you would do it as if you were writing like a backbone app or an Angular app where you use some sort of like JSON REST API. So I don't know that we'll like spend a lot of time on that, but it would be good for people to have an example probably. So in short, all of these things are possible. There's not like ready-made solutions for all of them, but yes, Derby does support all these things really well. So that's actually one of the things I want to focus on in like my documentation, because I think it's pretty unique and a really neat thing about Derby.
So showcasing these various use cases.
Mm-hmm. And I think like eventually it will make a ton of sense for ShareJS to be like a hosted solution, similar to a lot of other ones out there, like Parse or Firebase, right? So you can imagine that somebody could have a generic ShareJS server, and your client app could connect to it, be it just like client-rendered stuff. It hasn't been our primary use case, so it's probably not like the #1 thing I would focus on personally, because it's not super useful to us. But I think like it's one of the things the platform supports really, really well.
Yeah, and having something like that would be, I mean, like I can imagine a WordPress-like thing. You know, it's like, yeah, you can run all this stuff yourself if you want. Like, here's all the bits you need to install, but we'll host it for you if you want. And here's some prices, something. Yeah.
And what's really cool about it is, like, you know, for us, we don't necessarily think that we'll use it that way, but you know, we make some open source components, and then somebody who does use it that way can use the same components, and that's really, really cool. Because if you look at like a lot of people who are writing components for Angular, you really just can't use those on server side. You just can't render them statically because
and I don't know if anything like Derby exists for Firebase, you know.
Exactly.
Well, presumably it's not too difficult to look into React or something, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you could make it work with like, you could write your own stuff on top of React that, and actually they have some stuff that like translates React into server rendered stuff now. So React has some cool stuff with it too. But the thing that you don't get is like the deep integration of the bindings with what the operations are, which is sort of the point of React, to be fair. Like the whole idea is that it's a view layer that works really well without understanding how the model layer works at all.
Right. Yeah. But actually, if you have that, there's a lot of really great performance boosts that you can get out of that, which I would like to realize at some point. Like I'd love to, you know, we should at some point like make a bunch of kick-ass benchmarks to put React to shame to, you know, take advantage of all that.
It should be totally possible, right? Like, if we actually have this understanding that like your list move is literally just a list move, and we send it all the way to server and to the other clients as a list move, we'd be able to shortcut a ton of work that React would otherwise have to do.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So so I think like there's something to be said for React's model just because it's like really good in a very, very different way. But I think like Derby is like just taking a very different approach. And there's always going to be trade-offs. Like React will end up being really great for some situations, and Derby will be really great for different ones. And that's kind of the power of open source software is people can design lots of different solutions, and then we can all kind of learn from each other.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Cool.
And by the way, on the React stuff, there is a project that Vladimir talked about, well, I don't know, maybe a month ago or 2 months ago, about the similar project to the ShareJS, which is called Swarm.js. And these guys, they actually created a demo application, a to-do application, that uses the Swarm.js plus the React.js.
Yeah, I saw this. They're using CRDTs, right?
Yes. So they basically like try to achieve the same thing that Derby does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's cool. So Joseph knows plenty about CRDTs, but they're an interesting data structure that's different than OT, but has a lot of similar characteristics. And they're pretty cool. Another person who's been playing around with them a lot is Dominic Tarr, who wrote a lot of stuff using CRDTs. And he wrote a different project. What was it called, Joseph?
Oh god, I can't remember. There was also I can't remember off the top of my head. CRDTs are basically OT, except that you bundle all of the history in with the operation, with the document itself. That's the right way to think of it algorithmically, and you know, so like your document will grow without bounds as you have more and more operations, but you You don't have to do transform or anything because that's built into the apply function in a sense. So.
Yeah. So in short, the long-term benefit to using OT and prod is that you can do kind of hacky stuff to trim out old data better.
You get a little control over your operation log and how your documents themselves are growing, because the document is just the JSON object of whatever the data is that you're transferring across. The downside is that using OT is a bit more complicated. Like, you've got this extra oplog that's kicking around. Yeah, that you have to manage, and you've got to take care of the life cycle of. But you can use it for other things. You can go through it, and you can yeah, I don't know. It's different.
Yeah. So yeah, they're both interesting and actually very similar solutions to the general problem. So it's also a very valid approach. It looked to me like Swarm was still like a little less generic than Share, but they didn't really share that much about it yet, so it's kind of hard to figure it out from what they told.
There's also I don't know if anyone. I still haven't seen anyone do JSON editing on top of CIDTs.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it's impossible, but no one's done it yet, as far as I know. So yeah, maybe these guys.
Like mostly people have been doing kind of like how Redis has like just like simple structures, like it has sets or it has hash maps or it has like things like that. So that's what a lot of people have been building with the CRDT libraries is a lot of specific data structures.
But even then, like, you can't. What are the use cases? If two people both do a set at the same time onto their, like, with the same key, then those two values end up conflicting. There's no, like, you don't have a good consistent way to pick a winner there. Like, there's some like weird things that end up with CIDTs because of how they work that make them much harder to implement at some of these data structures. Maybe you can just ignore some of the conflicts and have it be not completely consistent, and that would be fine. Or yeah. Let's have it lose data sometimes. Like, there's probably answers there, but yeah, it's harder than OT. It's harder than OT to implement something like JSON because you don't have an explicit transform phase.
Yeah, the really big benefit of CRDTs comes in if you want to do peer-to-peer, because you don't have to worry about ordering operations. But in doing peer-to-peer with OT is actually kind of tricky.
Yeah. But the problem is that the trickiness of doing peer-to-peer with OT is actually, in effect, bolted into using CIDTs at all, whenever you're using CIDTs.
I guess that's true. It's sort of just pushing the problem around.
Yeah, and that might be a better place to solve the problem, because with CIDTs you have this extra data structure that you can hang your historic operations on, which means that you don't have to worry about like the order of those operations chronologically. You've instead got them stored semantically throughout your document. But you have the same set of problems around, like, if we've got a list and we're reordering the list, and I delete all the elements of the list. Nate deletes something at the start, Nate inserts something at the start, and Ian inserts something at the end, and like dealing with what should actually happen there, given different transform, everything. Anyway, it's different. It's a different set of problems because of just the algorithm, but it's fundamentally very similar, and no one's done. It's got a different set of problems than OT. And no one's done JSON with it yet properly.
But I think the biggest, like, to play this out for a couple of years, I think the biggest reason why OT is kind of a nicer solution in a realistic web app is that you have the ability to truncate the operation log at some point and throw away all of the old state cleanly. And with the CRDT, in order to do that, what you actually have to do is like basically rebalance your tree, because all that shit's in the document. And to do that, you have to do a synchronous operation across all clients until people can continue to edit it in asynchronous ways. So it just really has operational difficulties that in OT you can be a little hand-wavy about some of the guarantees. Like somebody can always do an operation, and doing that in practice is actually really useful. So you guys might not all know like exactly all the details here, but I think like in short, this is a pretty cool and valid solution. That's that's similar to Share, but there's some interesting trade-offs, and this would make for a good blog post at some point.
Absolutely.
So we actually have to go. we have a meeting starting very soon. This planning thing, but yeah, I think the plus side is that next week we'll have a good idea of how we're dedicating our resources, and yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for joining us again this week, and we'll see you all next week.
Yep. See you next week.
Later, guys.
Yeah, see you then.